Great.
All right. Today's date is June 17th, 2024. My name is Jacob Stickle. I'm the archival assistant here in Warren County, and I'm here with
Amber Stegner. I'm imaging support with Warren County.
And I'm Todd Stephenson, former resident of Kings Mills from Austin, Texas, but we come up here in the summertime and take care of family and do volunteer work at different places in Warren County.
Thank you for coming. All right, and we're here to do the oral history here. I guess we should start with childhood questions. Well, you already mentioned your name. So when and where were you born?
I was born and raised in Kings Mills, but I was born in Cincinnati on Christmas Day. So I was a Christmas baby, and my mom would tell the story that it was the loneliest day of her life because everybody else had cleared out and she was in the maternity ward by herself. So I always felt good about being, gee, Mom, I didn't know I depressed you so much when I was born. But that was back in the mid-50s, and it was a great time.
I get it. I was born the day after Christmas.
So you know what it's like. I've never had a birthday party.
Oh.
No.
Because you can't invite friends over on Christmas Day. So,
No.
But I survived. I'm psychologically okay.
I'm sure my dad always threatened to give me the toy and the batteries for my birthday. Yeah, I'm sure you got a lot of that.
Oh yeah.
Hint, hint to your family.
Oh yeah.
So how'd your family come to live there?
Well, the Stephenson family has been part of Warren County since the early 1800s. My great-great-great-grandfather immigrated from western Pennsylvania with the Guston family. And the Guston family, they bought land near Red Lion in the early 1800s, and then later bought land and at the intersection today of I-71 and 123. So the truck stop that's out there, that was the Stephenson 80-acre farm from early 1800s until probably like early 1900s, and then they sold it. But they lived there, and then my grandfather, who worked on that farm, moved to Kings Mills during right before World War I and got a job at Peter's cartridge factory. And so from the early 1900s, even until present day, there's been Stephensons in Kings Mills.
Man.
Okay.
Right at that time, too. Right when it was picking up. They're very fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you're looking at it.
Right, exactly. But it was a time of social change in terms of where it was primarily agrarian to now there was manufacturing opportunities, and people flocked to that. And so my grandpa had a little bit of electrical background and mechanics background, so he fit right in. By doing all that work on the farm, that was a great need that the factory there at Peters and Kings Mills needed people like that. So
yeah,
and that was the other part of it too. Is not only if you work for them, you don't have a job, but they provided housing because of the homes that were built in Kings Mills. If you worked at the factory, then you lived at. And they either had homes, duplexes, or they had, like apartment complexes. It was very kind of interesting in terms of diverse housing opportunity that the companies provided for people, and it was to attract them to come and work for them. So that was that. That's, and like I said, and I grew up in there too, and it was always just Kings Mills was the town, so that's where I grew up.
That's a fantastic way to describe it. It features pretty prominently in a lot of our online collection too. Just a lot of different photographs that come up during an exhibit we've done. So it's a very interesting town. And we should mention it later on, but I interviewed a woman by the name of Marvel Ferguson, who I believe had relatives that worked in the Peter cartridge factory, and I believe she's 100 and early hundreds.
104, I think is.
104.
Wow.
But I can get you in contact with her niece, if you're interested.
But when I lived there, I went to school there, and I was also the local paper boy. So all our family, my older brothers, and then when it was my turn, Then I delivered the Western Star, the Middletown Journal, and because you would up and down the streets every day, you knew everybody what was going on, and then my mom, I'll mention that later, but she worked for the Western Star as a correspondent, and so she was making sure that her work was getting distributed by her sons,
right.
Delivering the papers. So.
Grassroots support. I like it.
Support, right? Absolutely.
What was the community at large like?
It was a very close-knit community. And what was interesting, and this is I found this out later when I was doing some research on about Kings Mills. There was 2 factories in Kings Mills. There was a Peters Cartridge and there was a King Powder Company.
Mm-hmm.
The Peters Cartridge was making the bullets or the ammunition, so it was using the applied product of the gunpowder and things that was built by the King Powder Company. The people who worked for the King Powder Company were primarily recruited from the coal fields of eastern Kentucky, and people who were used to high risk opportunity, in terms of jobs, but looking for an opportunity of one to gain a house and getting paid better than what they were getting paid there. That was that group, and they had 2 or 3 streets that were just those people. Then the other streets were inhabited by the people who worked for Peters Cartridge, and some of them were research chemists.
Oh.
And engineers and mechanical engineers that worked in all the machinery. So there was a little bit of a difference in terms of the educational and cultural background within the community. And also King Powder Company at time right before World War II became a union shop. So there was a union versus a non-union perspective. And although people got along, everybody, but there was a little bit of a and they knew based on where you lived, who you worked for. And sometimes it caused some problems, but most of the time it was, people were very proud to be from that town. And I was too, so it was great.
It sounds like the smaller community prevailed at that point.
It did. And it was, and one of the things I've been in checking, now that you're gone and come back and look at things, the whole idea about a company town. And I would say that Kings Mills was one of the classical examples in the state of Ohio of a company town.
Yeah.
Like Hershey, company in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and the Pullman Company in Illinois are examples of where the company leadership said what's our responsibility to not only provide housing, the social contract between the employer and the employee, and so that was very prevalent in Kings Mills for sure, and that's a good thing and it's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing that they were very progressive in terms of providing the amenities for their employees earlier for the same size of a village in Warren County as compared to other villages in Warren County. They had running water, they had free garbage pickup, they had a library system that was available to them. They had, in terms of even a sewer system that eventually became a problem, but it was early on that they had sidewalks, they had street lights, they had fire hydrants. This is in the early or late 1800s, early 1900s. So that was like, so you think about the planned communities in the 21st century about everything. Well, it was kind of an example like that would made it attractive. But then once those companies leave, there's nothing there to then back up and say, well, who's going to take care of all this now that they're gone?
Yeah.
Okay.
All their eggs in one basket, and
exactly. And it never really developed. There was a civic spirit, and people did a lot of things, in terms of holidays and gatherings, and proud of their band that they were famous for and things. But then once those companies left, that they really didn't develop the civic leadership to get people to say, hey, we need to consider being incorporated, and and to run our own, take care of ourselves. And everybody, once the companies left, everybody just went off and were hired by Frigidaire or GE or other manufacturing sites in Southwest Ohio, and it became truly a bedroom town, and that's what it ended up being. That's what it is today. So, if I'm going into too much more than what you're looking for, just do this. Or something.
You're fine.
And no worries, you're brought you in here to talk.
Okay.
And you're talking about the history of Warren County. I don't mind at all.
Okay. All right. Good.
The next question was going to be, so what were your parents like growing up?
My parents was Clarence and Aline Stephenson. My dad was a graduate of Denison University with an engineering degree. The year he graduated was the year of the Great Depression.
Ooh.
So when he graduated, he was fortunate enough to get a job with the Pennsylvania State Highway Department, and he was involved in the working and design of the Pennsylvania Turnpike for a couple of years. And then he got tired of that and then moved back to Kings Mills in, I think, 1935, and then was hired by Peters Cartridge Company, and he became the engineering maintenance manager for the factory. So, and my mom, her mom and dad both worked at Peters Cartridge, and so she went to high school there and graduated. So my dad did too, and but there was like a 6 or 7 year gap between the two of them. And when he came back, he was a college-educated, eligible bachelor, and she was a high school girl, recent high school graduate that worked as a stenographer at Peters Cartridge, and that they met there and dated, and eventually, got married, and so that was a really cool thing. That, and then they stayed. So for my mom, she was born, raised, and lived her entire life in Kings Mills for 93 years. So
93.
Yeah. So that's kind of a longevity and loyalty, and I'm staying here, and she stayed there. So and then one of the things my dad took over when he was responsible when the Peters Cartridge Company was sold to Remington Arms, and then after World War II, Remington decided to consolidate all their operations to Bridgeport, Connecticut. Well, they offered my dad a job to come move to Bridgeport, and he wouldn't do it. But his project was he had to do the dismantling and the shipping of all the equipment from Peters Cartridge and have that shipped by rail to Bridgeport. So he had the unenviable job of all the people who were still worked there were mad at him because he was working for the company that was moving everything out. So he was just doing what he was told and following through. And he goes, it was a very disappointing thing that there was equipment that was destroyed on purpose because Remington didn't want that equipment to get into the hands of their competitors. And so rather than use it or sell it, he said it was just, so as an engineer, he was just so, heart sick that he had to, destroy all that and then deal with people that were very upset.
Yeah, and he chose to stay at that.
And he chose to stay. And then after that project and everything was moved out, then he was hired and worked for the rest of his career at Cincinnati Millicron in Cincinnati. And there was some, people that, that he had relatives that knew and said, hey, you'd be a great fit. And he went down there. And so he had a successful career as a mechanical engineer down in Cincinnati, and did that for his life. And then my mom, after they got married, and then she became a stay-at-home mom and was active. And then after World War II, then she took on this role of being the correspondent, the local correspondent for the Western Star, which is before Facebook, before Instagram, before TikTok. She was the one that kind of gathered the social scene of what was going on in Kings Mills. Okay. And so think about using a party line telephone and making phone calls every week, and whether it was church related with the local Kings Mills Baptist Church, or whether it was school related, or a lot of it was socials, like who came to visit from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and they stayed for 2 days and had a wonderful time at the picnic, and up and had dinner at the Golden Lamb. It would be that kind of thing, and
Always so nosy.
well, she was no. Sorry, Mom. She was, but that was her job to do all that. And people, you'll be amazed, people would volunteer all kinds of information. And then there also would be people that would play jokes on her.
Jeez.
That
anything we should know if in case of our research ends up to being a little bunk?
Well, there was some issues of the septic system in Kings Mills, and his family was working on digging up the lines that was kind of messed up. Well, my mom called that family, and she goes, "Oh yeah, we had a wonderful time. I'll call Boyd to come in, and he'll talk to you." And so Boyd, I won't give his last name, but came and said, "Oh, we had a wonderful party. We had hot chocolate that was served, and brownies." And so my mom thought they had a party in the backyard, and he was making fun of this, trying to repair the septic line in his backyard, and it got written up in the newspaper. Oh my gosh. And so my mom never found out. She never knew that it was a joke. But the family and this was something I found out like 3 years ago.
Oh my
because the lady told me that story. She goes, "We were so embarrassed, but Boyd was such a joker," and I go, "Oh, that's fantastic." I just
Now
thought it
I
was
wonder
great.
how many of those little blurbs, because they did this in like several newspapers. People did this kind of thing, so I'm wondering how many of those are actually jokes.
Yeah. So again, if I digress, I'm sorry, but I thought this is like a little different in terms of things that but what's interesting is that a lot of people talked about how they would look forward to see Mrs. Stephenson's article and what was going on, and and that's how you kept up with things, in terms of reading that newspaper every week. So it was important. Okay.
And it does help us out. Even the little things where so-and-so comes and visits, it says a name.
Right.
And we can pin a place on somebody. So it still helps us.
Yeah, it helps to establish a timeline and document things like that. And then the other thing, my family was involved, very active in that Baptist church. And so they were, did that, quote unquote, religiously. But my dad was also, by his work with the Peters Cartridge Company, they had an employee there that was responsible for reading the river level of the Little Miami River at the bridge.
Oh.
Okay, so he started doing that, during World War II, and kept doing it, and he kept track of every day we'd go out and measure the river. And so he worked and was a volunteer, but actually then got paid working for the U.S. Weather Bureau. And so he would capture and then send in the reports. And then if there was a flooding activity, he would get called either from the Wilmington office or from Cincinnati to go down and take more readings so they could understand in terms of, about flood conditions. And he did that until 1975. And then my younger brother, John, then took over. And he has done it until just last year when they tore down the old bridge and built a new bridge, and they did not put a river reading measurement there that's now at South Lebanon. So Stephenson was measuring the river level and the rainfall level at Kings Mills for close to 60 or 70, well, more than that, 75 to 80 years.
My goodness.
And my dad would get letters of requests from attorneys in Lebanon back in the 40s and the 50s, and if they had a lawsuit that was coming up, to try to track what was the weather condition on this date. Because my client says it was raining that day and they had a car accident, and so Dad had a record, and so they would have him come in as an expert witness to say, I'm a representative of the U.S. Weather Bureau, and on June 27th there was 8.8 inches of rain that fell from such and such a time.
Oh, that's fun.
So it's just little, tidbits of things that. So that's what they did. And like I said, my brother was like, he was ready to kind of give this up too. That after a while, it's an important thing because you're trying to help with their models about flooding downstream and things like that. So it was an important role. But after a while, it's more automated, so that works out. It's probably more accurate too.
And it's the state of things and how it just progresses, right?
But he would be, measuring the river on the bridge. So he would be leaning over and it would lower crank this thing down, and it would come to the, measure where the river was. He had many times people would stop and think he was trying to commit suicide by jumping up, or that he was sick and they thought he was vomiting into the river. And he had to turn and explain to people that, no, I'm doing this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is an official role. And it's just crazy that, what people think when they drive by and see somebody doing something. Because he wasn't fishing, that's for sure.
Right. No, you didn't see any pole or bait or nothing.
Right.
That's fun, though. And it's kind of like nice to hear that people are concerned about somebody.
Well, yeah. And that's what I told him. I said, well, John, people are looking out for you. Well, I guess, but it was so embarrassing or something.
Wow. I know I didn't put this on here, but do you have any other siblings besides your brother?
Yes, I had 3 older brothers and a younger sister and a younger brother. So I was one of 6.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, and so it was 3 older brothers, and then there was a 7-year gap, and then it was the next 3. So, and what's interesting is the family always felt that because the 3 that were born earlier, my dad was still early, in developing his career path in doing things at Cincinnati Millicron, and spent a lot of extra time and work focusing on that. Then when we were born, he was a lot more into, more of a management role and had more freer time. So he ended up, and my mom, going to our activities, whereas my older brothers felt like, well, you never did go to my baseball game. And so there was always a little sibling rivalry or resentment that they raised their first group different than they raised their second group. Okay?
Oh, Lord, you're going to have that for any little sibling.
And
especially.
Absolutely. But my oldest brother did work with my dad at the Cincinnati Millicron. My next older brother, Mark, was a Vietnam veteran.
Oh.
And he also worked for the Turtle Creek Township and the Warren County Highway Department, and was a supervisor in their bridge crew.
Oh.
So a lot of the local bridges that you see in Warren County, he was involved in either constructing that or safety inspections or things like that. He did that for quite a few years. And then my next brother was a teacher and guidance counselor at the King's School District for his whole career. So he stayed. And then my sister moved to Kentucky and got married and worked in the medical systems in the hospitals in Kentucky. And then my youngest brother, who still lives in my original house that was built in 1914 in Kings Mills, and he works in the finance department at Otterbein.
All right.
On 741. He's done that for more than 30 years.
Good for him. And I'm glad it still stayed in the family, too.
Stayed in the family, too. Right.
Man, that's always exciting to hear. I was already caught into what your parents do for a living.
Okay.
Oh, you had mentioned delivering newspaper to Edna Boyer on the phone.
That's true that Edna was, the Boyer family was one of my customers. They were really good about paying their bills, which was good. But Edna and my mom, Aline, were classmates in King's High School, so they were very good friends. And so anytime I would, stop and deliver the paper, and if Edna was there, then she would always ask about Mom and how the family was going and things like that. So it was, and then Edna was a very good basketball player.
I didn't know.
And my mom was the manager for that basketball team. So several years while they were there, that the girls, and also one thing to go back is that Kings Mills, the companies built a gymnasium in Kings. It was one of the earliest wellness centers in Warren County because it was built not just for the school, it was built for the community to use for exercise, actually for personal hygiene, because they had showers, both men and female showers that they had, that people could then, if they didn't have access to that in, whatever their home situation was, that they were encouraged to use that. And then he held activities, during the year. And so I'm trying to think, where was I going with this? So but the gymnasium was an important part of the community, and it was another contribution that they made, to the people to use it. And I played there when I was in junior high. That's where we had all our athletic, things going on, and it was great. It was great.
Sure, that sounds nice. It really does. I already mentioned, and down here is where I mentioned, Western Star, we can talk about.
Well, the other thing about the Western Star and tied to Warren County is that when my mom was recruited to be the correspondent, she was recruited by a man named Warren Nelson, or Bud Nelson, who was a very prominent citizen, and he was the publisher of the Western Star. Bud became appointed by Governor James Rhodes to be the director of highways for the Ohio Highway Department for many, many years. So to Mom, he wasn't Warren Nelson, it was Bud. And so she, we had, she had a real close relationship in terms of working relationship, doing things for him, and he was very supportive of her in terms of her schedule and doing things like that. So there was that connection. And actually Bud had a contest that in whoever was the baby born on his birthday or his wife's birthday, that he was going to give a special gift. And my oldest brother was born on that day, so there's a article in the Western Star talking about Bud Nelson giving a baby bassinet to Todd Stephenson from Kings Mills because young Tommy was the born on that birthday. So it was kind of and Bud would tell stories about Governor Rhodes, that Governor Rhodes only would wear shirts that he could purchase at Keever's Men's Store on Broadway in Lebanon, and that Keever's they would order these special shirts, and Bud would then go over to the store before he would drive up to Columbus and then give them to the governor, because those were the special kinds of dress shirts that he wore. So shout out to Keever's for which is an old store, an old thing from Lebanon, and I don't remember why Bud told that story to Mom, but he just thought that was an interesting thing. But
that seems very specific for a whole governor to say.
Well, that's kind of what I thought too. But it was, and interesting.
Wild. And I believe I have heard of Bud Nelson before, so it's wild that all these things are just connecting. I have some more adult questions. Just
sure.
What did you do after your childhood? Work, education?
Well, I graduated from King's High School. I was valedictorian of the class, and went to Ohio University, and was on academic scholarship at Ohio U, and then also was like a resident assistant in the dormitory. So for most of my career at OU, I was pretty much, everything was paid for. Tuition was paid for, room and board was paid for. So I was kind of earned my way to get my education in Athens, and got a degree in geology. And then once I graduated from there, I got an assistantship at University of Cincinnati and got my master's degree, and then was hired by Amoco Production Company, which is an oil company in Houston, and I worked there for 20 years with them. They were bought out by BP, and then I became a member of their management team in Houston. But I had staff in Aberdeen, London, Houston, Tulsa, and Dallas, Texas for a couple years. And so it was difficult just traveling a lot. And so my wife kind of got tired of that, and so I was able to take an early retirement. And when I did, I had a friend of mine who was still working for another company up in Oklahoma, and he said, "You're too young to retire." So they dangled some cash to come up and do that. I said, "I'll give you 5 years," and that's what I did. I worked in as a company called Chesapeake in Oklahoma, and did that for 5 years, and then I've been retired for now going on 9 years. And when I was retired, we then sold our house in Oklahoma, moved back to Texas, and we bought a home, and that's why we live in a town called Georgetown, which is about 30 miles north of Austin. So we live down there during the fall and winter and early spring, and then come up to Ohio because my wife's family had a lake house at Lake Lorelei in Brown County, and we bought that to keep it in the family. They moved to a retirement facility in Cincinnati. Her father has passed away a couple years ago, and so we still come up and then take care of. It's our rotation to take care of her mother during the summer, and then so when I did that, that's why I've been back in Ohio and back in near Warren County, and I go, I want something to do. And that's when I started going and visiting Fort Ancient. And I had a geology background. I go, how can I help them, or how can I do? And they were very interested in, because they get a lot of, believe it or not, geology questions about why certain things look the way they did or whatever. And so for a couple of years, I still do, I give lectures at Fort Ancient and talk about the geologic influence on the Native Americans that built Fort Ancient. And so there's a lot of things that, as a geologist, I was like, wow, they have materials that they use that, like, they would make artifacts or make ornaments or things out of copper. Well, the copper came from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Oh.
Or they would have sheets of mica that they would use as like a reflecting glass, or they would carve things out of it. Or there was silver that they know that either their earrings or ear spools, they call them, or things were from Quebec, Canada, and some of the spear points or arrowheads that they found in some of the earthworks, both in Fort Ancient as well as over in Chillicothe and a lot of other places in Ohio. It was from obsidian, and obsidian is volcanic glass. So there's no volcanoes in Ohio, but they were able to trace that this volcanic glass was from Yellowstone National Park. So there's a history of transport and trade and movement of raw material from all over parts of North America that somehow were concentrated and found and utilized and manufactured by the Native Americans that here in Ohio. And I just thought that was fascinating, that people need to hear the story that not only were they great hunters or gatherers or artisans, they were actually really good geologists. To be able to figure out, where is this material, how could I use it, and then to go look for it, explore for it, extract it, transport it, and then do something with it and make something beautiful, and then be able to tell the story of where that precious material came from. So for example, the material for a lot of the copper was from Isle Royal, which is an island in Lake Superior. 15 miles from the shoreline. So think about it. Over 2,000 years ago, that either they had a dugout canoe or some type of raft to go open water on Lake Superior to get to the Isle Royal. And then what's interesting on Isle Royal, it's an elongate island, but there's fractures in the bedrock of the island, and these fractures are filled with native copper. And so it would you could see something that would be anywhere from maybe 6 inches to maybe a foot or two wide, and it could go for a mile or more. And they would excavate and dig out that, and it was native copper, which some of the calculations they look at is almost like over 99% pure.
Wow.
So they didn't have to do any smelting of it to purify it. It was already pure. And so think about it, they did that, and then so they extracted that, and then to take it back 15 miles to go back to the shore, and while they're there, it's you think about the climate of that part of Lake Superior, storms or fog or tremendous examples of aurora borealis, the native lights that would have been pictured for them. So you can imagine how spiritual that experience was for the people that found that and then brought that back. So when you would tell that story and shape it, that's why that material was held in such reverence, because of where it came from. So that's one example of what I try to tell. It's more storytelling, but it's storytelling about something, and don't go into all the gory details about the geology, whatever. But I'm interested in it, and I give them examples. But they also found shark teeth from Chesapeake Bay, Maryland.
Wild. I've been told a little bit about this when I was growing up in Dayton. A couple little examples, because there's always the mounds around, and
Right.
they had to really emphasize the trade network that Native Americans have. And I remember it even being brought up when I was going through grad school. I took a class specific on Native Americans and early America, where they had when European settlers started to come in, anything that got traded through the people on the east side ended up going way out west as well. So,
but what's interesting, Jacob, is that there's a lot of discussion about, was it truly a trade network? And some of the archaeologists, in terms of their findings, says if it's a true native or a true network, then artifacts and materials from Ohio should be found all over the place in other parts of North America. There's scattered evidence of that. So what they think is that it was a site that people traveled to. If you think about people in the Muslim world traveling to Mecca and to worship, so that you would have different people and groups of people would come to the various locations in these earthworks that were there in Ohio and brought offerings or brought things with them. And if they took something back, it might be consumable in terms of whatever they were able to eat or to wear or something else, then to go back to where they were from. So it was more of they're finding things here than actually stuff that was here distributed someplace else.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's why the whole story of Fort Ancient and the sites over in Newark and in Chillicothe are very, very special, and why it was recognized by World Heritage worldwide that these are recognized and they should be World Heritage sites. And so I spent, again, my years when I was doing all this, they asked me to be a part of what they call their ambassadors group. So the Ohio History Connection had a group, and I think there's 40 to 45 of us, or maybe more. We were individual ambassadors, and we had backgrounds of whether it was in science, whether it was in government, whether it was in the tourism industry, or academics, or things like that. That we were involved in helping getting this through and get this in terms of being recognized, to have that happen, which was a lot of work to get that done. And so we would, again, go and give talks. I've given a talk to out at Otterbein. I've given a talk to the Warren County Historical Society, and I've done it also with the Warren County Genealogical Society as well. And just say, do you know what's in your own backyard? It is so special. And also I've given a talk at Miami University in Oxford as well. And I'll tell another story too. Of course. That when I tell them about the history of Warren County and a little bit about the geology, that there's maps that people have documented of there's a fossil elephants that used to roam in Ohio called woolly mammoths and mastodons. Well, there's a map that shows concentration of where these have been found in Ohio, and they've compiled it by county. And Warren County has one of the highest concentrations of finding of mastodon or woolly mammoth bones rather than any other place in Ohio. And so when I was at Miami, I gave them a talk, and I go, "Well, you realize what's the party symbol for the Republican Party?" And they go, "Oh, it's the elephant." And I said, "See, I have direct evidence that the Republican Party has concentrated and controlled Warren County for at least 10,000 years." And they got a big laugh out of it. So I have to be real careful when I tell that joke. Sometimes they depending who the audience are, they might not laugh at it, but it's it's just something you try to, and I try to tell people that, again, Warren County is so special. Mm-hmm. And it's special, one, because of the world-class archaeology things that we have here, especially Fort Ancient. Yeah. World-class in terms of a national scenic river that runs through it, and it's beautiful, the Little Miami River. And also all the glacial topography that creates the wonderful farmland that is part of Warren County as well. And also not only the farmland, but the water resources, the groundwater that's there due to buried streams. And I said, it's just, to me, it's kind of a unique thing that my background as a geologist and getting interested in history, but getting interested in archaeology, in retirement, it's all kind of come together in doing something that I enjoy and then be able to share that with others. So that's what I've been doing. So I try to do something that's worthwhile and I enjoy it, and want to give back, because people who have worked in the oil and gas industry today, you're not necessarily viewed in a very positive light, because you're the reason that the planet's going to where. And it was something that oil and natural gas was an important part of what the country needed for energy and transportation, for all kinds of products that are there. It's just how well are we as stewards of that, going point forward. You can't change what happened in the past, but you can look at what should we be doing as things like that. So that's kind of what I was trying to do, is steer and direct a little bit differently in that way. So
I think that's commendable.
Okay.
And you mentioned your wife earlier, and she was really into genealogy as well. How did you meet her?
We met at Ohio University. Becky was my cafeteria crush. And so we both lived in the dorm, different dorms, but she was a cutie, and so that's where we connected. And I graduated, and then she's still there and finished up. And by the time she graduated and I finished my graduate work at UC, then we got married and moved to Houston and had our life and family. So we have an older son, our one son and one daughter that are my son lives in Dallas now, and my daughter lives in San Francisco. So different parts of the world. So so Ohio U is a big deal for us in terms of that's how we met. Yes, happy to be there. Go back and visit.
Well, that's nice, and that explains why it came up during when I was looking up an initial search for you. There was a article that mentioned you in Ohio University, and I'm sure you talked to them a little bit. And
Well, I was part of I was there on their alumni association. They have a couple of different terms that you can do, and I did that for 3 years, and was able to give back. But it was interesting that I felt more tied back to Warren County and doing things here than spending my time trying to recreate what life was like in Athens when I was growing up as a college student. And it was, when you go away, things change. And so Becky and I both felt like one, it's by staying here and doing things here, it's closer to her family and my family that's still in and around the Kings Mills area. So that's why we ended up focusing and doing that here.
That's
Okay.
nice. And
Yeah.
that's usually against the curve because it's wherever somebody usually graduates, they tend to stick around.
Right, exactly. And so that's the difference.
That's
Okay.
nice. Oh. And the next one was, I understand that you got your degree in geology. So how was that jump in geology to petroleum and working with BP?
Part of it is you're a student of the earth,
Mm-hmm.
and you're trying to understand locations of where there would be an accumulation of oil and gas. And so things that you learn by studying outcrops and quarries and things around in terms of the strata that are in the earth, then you understand where things would have a better chance of forming and accumulating either as oil and gas in different parts of North America. So I've worked in the West Texas Permian Basin, Gulf Coast, the Rocky Mountains, part of the Appalachians, and then I also did international work and worked in offshore Norway, West Africa, and South America. So as a local kid who grew up in a town of 700 people, and then to be able to go and have a world international career in doing things like that, and it was great. It was a wonderful experience culturally to be able to experience that and to live and work in those countries, and so it was great.
Pretty, yeah. No, that's really interesting to just be able to, from Moore County, you managed to go all the way around. Is it South America as well? Where there?
Primarily in Argentina.
What? Wouldn't have guessed there. I thought it would be more golf, like you mentioned.
No, but Argentina was a big project, and Trinidad off the north coast of South America is also an important area that we did work on too. It's you, and then you work with the local governments, because sometimes it's, the United States is unique in terms of oil and gas ownership or royalties, or it can be owned by individuals. So if you own land, you bought 100 acres in Warren County, depending on how things have been sold down there, you not only have surface rights, but you have mineral rights as well. And so mineral rights then can be leased. So a company can come in and say, well, Jacob, you got 100 acres. We would like to offer you $300 an acre for 5 years each. And then we can drill a well or whatever. And then whatever we extract, you can get anywhere from 10%, 20 to 30% of the revenue is given to you. And that's how people will sign leases like that. So that's individual. And then whether it's state or federal, then state of Ohio has their lease contracts if you drill on state land, or federal land, which is primarily more out west, is where they have specific rules. So then if the federal government decides, well, we want to really shut down in terms of oil and gas drilling, well, they can change and adjust what those leasing agreements are. And so that keeps people from doing any activity. Same thing in offshore, Gulf of Mexico, or even one of the projects we had working was the North Slope of Alaska.
Oh, goodness. The North Slope, would that be federal land? I have no idea.
That'd be federal land, yeah.
Okay.
Well, federal land and state land.
Okay.
Okay.
Alaska, I think, is the place with the most federal land, if I
It
recall.
is, right.
Okay, that makes sense. Wow. This is an aside, but I try to keep abreast of the news. I've been hearing talk about deep sea mining. Can you touch on that? Out of curiosity.
There's things there's minerals that come out of suspension in terms of whether both temperature, chemical, and pressure conditions in the deep oceans, and they will precipitate out. And so there's different places where there's manganese or other types of ore or energy sources that are there but that's very cost prohibitive unless you can really develop the technology. But then also it's an environmental hazard in terms of what you're trying to do, and if you make a mistake, what's that going to do to that eco environment at that particular depth or location. So and the other part of it too, what's interesting that I'm keeping up with too, is that there's a lot of activity that people talk about fracking and how horrible that is, and one, it causes its pollution, and also it starts earthquakes. Well, the reason it starts earthquakes is not the actual fracking process. It's the disposal of the water once they've extracted it out and pumped the water into underwater or underground rock formations that they overpressure those rock formations. And if there's pre-existing fractures or faults, that can trigger earthquakes. But what's interesting is that there's people or companies that are working on that the water that they extract. So when you're producing gas or you're producing oil, there's usually formation water that was in the ground that gets produced with it.
Right.
They're finding that there's some concentrations of lithium in that water that they can concentrate the lithium and process it such that it can then be used as a different source for the batteries that they're making for cars and things in the future. Instead of depending on buying it from China or someplace else, there actually could be a benefit. Okay? Do you see what I mean in terms of...
I do. That's wild.
And that's part of America, that people are entrepreneurs enough to be able to look at something and say, gosh, that's awful. You're polluting it, but actually use technology and analysis and be able to turn it into a worthwhile product that would be in demand and can make money from it.
That's a wonderful thing. And going back to 4-H, it reminds me of Native Americans using every part of the animal coming into the tribe.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I was looking down here trying to figure out where I was at.
Jacob, where are you? Come on.
I know. I was looking at scopes. Anything particular you like to reflect on your career? We mentioned going all over around the world. Anything particular that you would like to mention that we didn't already bring up?
No, I think it's... I went to public school and went to state universities and had a career. By the time I, was able to be in a leadership position where I was chief geologist for BP North America onshore. And when I worked in Oklahoma City, I was vice president of geoscience technology and responsible for their lab. So, it's people here, you get grounded, and it ended up being, it's like, what do you bring to the table? And it was not only your expertise, but it's also your value system and how well you work with people and how honest and trustworthy you are makes a difference. Yeah. And I was able to use those things that my family and my town and my school, my church kind of taught me to make me into the person that I am, that I was respected and I was appreciated and I was utilized in terms of leadership roles in multinational corporations, to the point where I, part of my responsibility at one time, was I did it as a joint with the leadership team, that we had, responsibility for a $1.3 billion drilling budget and keeping all the activity going on, over the course of a year. And that's a lot of responsibility. And so that's the other thing I try to help with, like with Ohio History Connection, is that we're working on, ways to raise funds and raise money to help support the World Heritage Sites that are in Ohio. Well, there's people that are really good at being archaeology, but there's also people that need help in terms of business approach and budgeting and fundraising and development. And so there's things that I'm not an archaeologist, but I can bring this to the table. And to their credit, they're very open about having people with different backgrounds to help them to get their story out and get to what they want to achieve. So I'm very happy to be a part of doing something like that.
Which is very, very inspiring coming from your original background too. And nice that they were able to actually incorporate or found something from your background to bring into their company, which is surprising and nice in a way that I was expecting.
I don't want to sound Pollyannish, but I'm just giving you my honest opinion. And were there troubles and issues? Yeah. Coming from the background, it was a rude awakening to go to Houston and live in that city, and but it was, I grew and be able to appreciate a very multicultural, international kind of approach, and that's how we try to raise our kids in terms of to appreciate other cultures and other languages, and to learn from that and realize you're just a small part of a really big world out there, and know that. So, okay.
I feel like that comes with travel too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
You're going into post-retirement formally, according to the questions here. We already talked about, so why digitize the parts of the Western Star instead of another way that you can honor your mother in that way?
Well, again, we felt like Becky is very much into genealogy, and using subscriptions or having to pay for subscriptions to get access to newspapers across the United States. Some of them you are free, a lot of them you have to pay for. And since my mom was involved in that for so long, and then people we talked to said, boy, I just wish I could get those, read about what she said about my family back in 57, and so because of my career, I've been very blessed from a financial standpoint, and we were looking for opportunities in terms of how could we give back. And then, because we would come and visit the Genealogy Center, and we would visit the Records Center for the things that we needed to put our family history together, I just started thinking about, well, what would it take? And so it started the conversation going between, these two groups about, could we do this? Could we pull it off? And then they had connections to the Ohio History Connection and the Memory Project, that things that they have involved in, and one thing led to another, and then we were able to make, we've made a couple of contributions to get that started. We're still not completely there yet. We have to get to the finish line, and how we're going to make that happen, but that's what we felt like that would honor my mom, and to document her life story and what she spent all that time doing that. And so it's called the Alan Stephenson Western Star Project. Yeah. And so and then we wanted to make it free to the public.
I think that's
now
wonderful.
Maybe the Genealogy Society probably wished that we hadn't done that they could have used it as a revenue source. And I understand that, but we just, it's like, if I'm going to pay that much money to have all this stuff done individually, then this is what our intent would be. And it's had, I forget what the latest count in terms of how many, whether it's close to 1 million access pages, of going to the Western Star, and that's just within a couple of years.
I believe it. I think about a quarter that's probably from me.
Well, that's why we did it, for people just like you.
Definitely appreciate it, because trying to, during my time in grad school, trying to research anything locally in Dayton at the time, it felt really restricting just to go through newspapers.com. And they're wonderful in what they do, but it's the subscription service that felt really prohibitive when you're trying to, look into your own backyard.
Right. And, so it's a joint thing with also this Warren County Historical Society too, that, they had access to the copyrights, and we were able to get agreement for them to be a part of that. That took a little time, but we eventually got there. And so, my hat's off to both of those organizations here in Lebanon and what they do, and the leadership role they take on here, and you folks too, in terms of the role that you do. It's commendable that not every county or place you go to has that kind of support. So it's great to be a part of a group like that. Okay.
Thank you. It's really exciting. What era of the Western Star is your favorite? For example, like when photographs were added, color editions, or weekly community news sections for each part of the hamlet, city, or village, or...
I'll be selfish.
Okay.
I go back and look at, I'll type in Todd Stephenson. So what all did my mom put in that newspaper that I didn't even remember? And so she would write everything. But then I played sports, in Kings. And so you could go back and relive, like Bruce Springsteen talking about, glory days. It was my way of going back glory days at Kings when, playing for sports. And, we finally beat Mason in football that one year. And I was... that was that's a big, it was actually a psychological thing for the town to beat Mason in 1971. I remember that. And so there's other things that, that I would look up, whether it's family members or friends. So it's probably more of my lifetime in that period that, I've spent most of my time, whereas my wife, who does all the family research, she goes all the way back and tracing things in terms of when did somebody sell their land, or when were death records, or when was a party recognized at such and such a church. And so yeah, that was, I guess that would be more how I would describe that I'm being selfish.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just Googling your own name, right?
Yeah, it is. And sometimes you're surprised at some stuff too. So.
Oh yeah, no, I get it.
So when you mentioned about Mike Kilburn, so that was Mike would be somebody that he played for Little Miami, and I know in terms of whether it's sports, basketball, football, or baseball, that we were opponents, and I knew Mike and of his reputation as a player. Whether he remembers me or not, I have no idea, but. And it's different people in terms of who stayed and then took on a leadership role in the county. So hats off to them for, the efforts that they did. It's good.
Yeah, it's always nice to see somebody local enjoying like more of it. Not, I shouldn't say enjoying, but going up to a more of a leadership role.
Right.
It's great to see.
It is, absolutely.
And did you? I was gonna joke and ask if did your mom ever include any little articles about when you were really little, growing up, where like, oh, Todd had this terrible stomach issue today, and
probably chicken pox and measles at the same time or something.
Oh yeah. You won't believe what Todd did this week.
Yeah, because it wasn't just me. There's a family of 6, so rarely it was that she would individually, unless there was something that, Todd won the memory verse contest at the Baptist church at Vacation Bible School or something like that. Then she might do that, but mostly it was more family, kind of things that she would write about.
Oh, I'm sure. You don't want to alienate one, and plus they probably only give you a one line.
That's right. That's right.
Do you have a particular favorite article that your mother included in the Western Star?
She was very proud that my dad was a dedicated river and rainfall observer for the U.S. Weather Bureau. And there was an article that when he got his 25th year anniversary pin, and somebody came down from Washington or maybe it was Cincinnati and gave him, he had a big certificate. Well, she had that thing framed and then had his picture out in the backyard next where he had his rain gauge, and him and this man were there. And so she wrote this long article, but had a picture of him standing there and talking about his dedicated service to the community and doing things like that. So she was proud of him for doing, and those two were together forever. And so it was nice to see, that he encouraged her to do stuff outside of just being the stay-at-home mom. Yeah. Because it was a lot of time that she would have to do all, the correspondent stuff and things, and we all pitched in and helped, and he did too, and supported her doing that. So he kind of set a good example as a husband and a father, to not just be so strict that, okay, woman, this is what you got to do. He was encouraging her and appreciative of all the different things she did, not only for the family, but for the church and for the community too.
That's
Okay.
really nice.
Yeah.
It's really nice. And at that era of time, you grew up in, for the sake of the recording, what time did you grow up?
I grew up from mid-50s and
Mid-50s.
graduated in 73.
So that time would be a lot, yeah. A little more rare those days. That's
So I was
great.
a late baby boomer.
Mhm.
So the baby boomers started, so I was kind of, the late 50s is when, the end of that, toward the end of that. And
Mhm.
so that's when they were just building schools everywhere. Population was exploding in Warren County, and yeah.
Oh goodness, I can only imagine what it was then until now. Because last week I referenced Warren County exploding from, I think it was roughly the year 2000. It was about 100. I misspoke. For 2024 to 2000 to 2024, there's been a growth of 100,000 people, which is crazy. And I can only imagine what it would have been in the 50s, how that growth would have.
Well, it was
grown.
post World War II.
Yeah.
And Warren County was, a bedroom and a farm county.
Mm-hmm.
But there was so much industry, out either in Hamilton or Butler or other, places around that people lived here because they loved it. It was a great place to live, but they worked someplace else. And the highway system was being built. Yeah. So there were roads and connections that allowed people to be able to do that and take care of their family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was right. And 75 came in right in the 70s, if I recall.
Yeah.
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 Did you begin? Oh. That is an interesting question. So, do you prefer Fort Ancient or Hopewell ceremonial mounds? I should have asked this a little bit earlier. But.
Well, Fort Ancient is a Hopewell ceremonial mounds.
Right.
And the reason it's Hopewell ceremonial mounds is the 8 sites that include Fort Ancient, Newark, and Chillicothe.
Okay.
So they're all grouped together, and that's what they are called. The individual site would have a name like Fort Ancient, Earthworks, and Nature Preserve.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So it's like my analogy would be for a World Heritage Site in Texas are the Spanish missions.
Mm.
So it's not one mission; it's a string of missions along, the river, and so it's strung out for a long distance,
Mm-hmm.
but it's all considered one World Heritage Site. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so you called the Spanish missions in Texas, and so for Ohio, it's the Hopewell ceremonial earthworks, but in 3 different geographic locations.
I gotcha. And
the next one that's up for consideration sometime down the road, it's even more famous than all the other ones, are Serpent Mound.
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
But Serpent Mound was built at a different time. So archaeologists were very specific, said, it wasn't built at the same time, so we shouldn't include it. But if they would, instead of calling it Hopewell, which is a time period that some of the archaeologists would refer to, if they would have just said earthworks, Native American earthwork sites in Ohio, they could have lumped all that together. But in doing that, because if you lump something, then the people who were making the decision of whether to go thumbs up or down, that's not specific enough.
Yeah.
And they might not get the designation.
Oh goodness.
This is why they thought they were able to guarantee that would happen.
Mm-hmm. Sounds a little bit like politicking and say, okay, if we include this in the bill and we call it this, we'll
Right.
pass.
But they are working, that's one of the things they hope, how long it'll take, I'm not sure, but Serpent Mound obviously is worthy of a World Heritage Site designation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, definitely. Do you see any involvement with Serpent Mound, or do you feel like not personally involved?
I've been invited to come and give my talks there, and I have, and so whether I'm going to be going to Chillicothe in July to be give a talk there,
Okay.
and part of it is just it's making things general enough so that it's only specific to Serpent Mound, because part of it is you have to be very careful and sensitive to things that have been excavated that were either there's an earthwork, but then there's also burial mounds, and so the restrictions in terms of what activity you do or what reference you make to things, artifacts that have been found from burial mounds versus earthworks. They've really been spending a lot of time trying to build relationships and rapport with the Native American tribes today, and they're very involved in it. And we just last week or two, they opened the new state park, the Great Council State Park up in Xenia, which is the birthplace of Tecumseh, which is a famous Shawnee chief that was here in Ohio.
I was unaware that they did that. That's awesome.
Oh, it's awesome. It's a great spot.
Great.
But that was his birthplace, or they think that was his birthplace. So it was a very close relationship in the design and how everything they have in that facility. That primarily they got input from the members, I think, of the Wyandotte family, the Eastern Shawnee of Oklahoma, and a couple other ones that had connections back to Ohio, and they were great supporters and great insight in terms of what it should look like.
That's fantastic, because building the rapport is going to be difficult, especially with Native American communities.
Well, they're very sensitive, and rightfully so. And the overall design of the facility is kind of like a great council house. So it's a long, elongated building, but open in terms of the skylights they have. So they really put a lot of thought and effort into what does the building look like and how does it reflect, how would it reflect in terms of, it's a modern 2024 building, but how does it fit into what it was like, hundreds and hundreds of years ago when they were here?
It's really
okay.
Really cool. That was a vaguer question. Going down the list here, how would you describe the interest in these groups?
Okay.
You described your work as the ambassador group. What makes Fort Ancient so unique in your mind?
Fort Ancient is the largest hilltop enclosure.
Enclosure. That is a
okay.
Key
So,
term.
in terms of its, the earthen walls that they built, both on the north side and the south side. I'm trying how many acres that it encloses, but it's built on a hilltop or a plateau, looking down into the Little Miami River Valley. So, and it's one of the best preserved.
Yeah.
That some of the other ones, both in Newark as well as in Chillicothe, had been renovated, or there's been restoration work done to build it back to what they think it was. Whereas most of everything at Fort Ancient, the only restoration work has been done by the Civilian Conservation Corps back in before World War II to build up and help with soil erosion. And they did some things there, and they built a couple of the buildings that are like, the picnic house or things like that they and had facilities there that they've worked on that. But and also Fort Ancient is the first state park in Ohio.
Oh, wasn't aware of that.
Absolutely, and Warren King Moorhead, who was a relative of the King family in Kings Mills, King Powder Company, was the archeologist, and I'll say that loosely, that did the research on Fort Ancient and convinced the state legislature to purchase the land to protect it, to keep it from being destroyed. So I think it was in 1890 or 91 or 92, the state legislature got the funds and they bought the land, and then they worked on, and it became a very, very popular place to, tourist stop for Warren County. And then even a little town of Fort Ancient down along the river was there for quite a few years too. And because the train would, go through the river valley, and so people could take the train, stop off at Fort Ancient and go up. And so now you can ride your bike or you can hike and then go from there and or kayak or canoe.
Plenty of different options.
So that's my goal thinking about it as an ambassador, is that I forget the hundreds of thousands of people that use the bike trail and the river. How many of them look up because the park, or Fort Ancient, is like 300 feet high on a plateau, and it's all the trees, and so it's kind of covered. Well, there's a crown jewel of a park that's right there that if you would just stop and take a break and go up, you could see that aspect of it too. So we're trying to figure out how to make that connection and do something to enable that more of a, at least from a tourism standpoint, of people to appreciate, not only the water, but the land, but then also archaeological feature like that. And it's very, very unique. And so what's interesting is that it doesn't come across very visual during the summer because there's so much tree growth and plant growth that you don't get the effect of, like, if you went to Stonehenge or you went to other places that would be World Heritage Sites. So one of the things they're trying to figure out is how do you manage from a vegetative nature preserves to free things up to be able to make it so that when you come there you see it versus it's all hit. And then the best time to do it is come in December and January when all the leaves are down, and then you see the earthworks in all their glory because they stand out.
That is an interesting balance that people have to hit on. I mean, you got to mow the lawn, I suppose, but you got to be able to preserve.
Well, and not only that, but then you got to make sure you don't encourage erosion, and you don't encourage people to, dig and plunder and try to dig, find stuff there. They need to leave it alone.
Right.
It's a great opportunity. That's all I can say for Warren County to be able to embrace that. And the city of Lebanon to embrace it, that there's such great things here. Why not, you don't have to just spend part of the day. You could spend a couple of days and see things here and in other parts of the county, let alone, I've got to go to Kings Island. You really can, and what they would tell you is that tourists that are tied to World Heritage Sites are a different type. They're usually international.
Yeah.
And they're looking for opportunities to be able to experience it, not only the feature, but the culture and the cuisine and other things that surround that. And they want to do it and spend a couple of days here. So that's why the convention center or the, what am I thinking of, whatever, the tourist bureau for the county should absolutely embrace that and figure out how do you put packages together. And not only that, thinking about what do you do about, say, public transportation to take, buses or whatever to get, go from Lebanon to go out there and come back and be able to see that and not have to worry about driving your car out there.
Right. And just getting rid of that extra expense of just getting with a renting car.
And you're encouraging them to do that. Yeah.
It's a very big thing because I can think back to going to visit the Dayton Aviation Museum up in Wright Pat. Start to see more international people coming in. They even have their own cafe there.
Yeah.
So that's what people do.
Exactly.
Do you have a favorite spot inside the fort?
There's a overlook on the the South Fort and the North Fort, and there's an overlook that be able to look out and you can see the Jeremiah Morrow Bridge and the Little Miami River Valley. So part of it is to go there at that overlook and be able to think back, well, what was it like 2,000 years ago? And think about people that would coming to Fort Ancient to worship or to gather, and they're bringing their stuff with them, and they're coming up in the canoes, and because there's sites all along the Little Miami River Valley of where there were earthworks or where there were evidence of encampments. Foster, Ohio, has a site, but it's on private property now. But and it's almost like it was a place, and that they think might have could have been, there's evidence or where people would interpret that if you had an elevated site that they had bonfires and they were signals whether, okay, I need to look for this. And so either they were constantly feeding to the bonfires or whatever, but they think that's possibly might have been more the role of that earthwork in Foster.
Interesting.
And then in Loveland and in Mariemont and in Newtown and Batavia, all along through there's all kinds of evidence of Native American earthworks and sites that are there. And unfortunately, some of the things have been destroyed because of gravel mining.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically one would be, even, I hate to say it, but in Morrow, that there's been sites that have been, they're no longer there because of, the gravel pit operations that happened along the Little Miami. But you have to have, there's this trade-off of, well, I need gravel to build I-71
mm-hmm.
or to, all the other construction that goes on. But then, unfortunately, some of the places that were actually Native American sites are no longer there because they've been destroyed. And it's not just there. I mean, Great Miami River going up through Dayton is the same thing.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's like whatever we have, try to hold on to it and preserve it so we don't lose them any more than what we already have. People would say there's anywhere from over 10,000 mound or earthwork sites that were present in the state of Ohio when you first had Europeans come in to settle here. And a lot of it's been destroyed because of agriculture or for development.
Yeah, that was when I believe it was the Adena Mound in Chillicothe.
Yeah.
I believe a farmer had gone through part of it because he was just cultivating his land, and then realized that there's something weird about this hill.
Yeah. Why is it here? It's not,
yeah. What's going on here? Have you, out of curiosity, been to the other ceremonial mounds?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I remember looking at some of these satellite views of it on the packet on UNESCO. How large, how many swaths of it have been taken over by private property or cultivated? Is it still...
For the actual sites that are World Heritage sites?
Yeah.
The place where it's been the most has been around Newark.
Mm.
And right now it's an issue because there's a golf course
right
on top of one of them. And so it's been an ongoing legal issue of the Ohio History Connection trying to break a lease. And then the lease was signed for X number of years. And so this golf country club says, well, we've been maintaining this. Well, but they maintain it, but they don't allow access unless you're a member of their country club.
Mm-hmm.
So they're telling people there's only a couple of times a year that people are allowed to go and walk around and to see it, or even allow Native American tribes to visit. They kick them off, tell them you're not supposed to be here. So it's gone through legal. There's things we're going through that the state of Ohio says that through eminent domain they're allowed to have this. So now they're trying to agree what is the correct compensation
mm-hmm.
to pay the country club for their lease, not their property, for the lease they have.
Oh.
And so that because if you're making us move, then it's going to cost X for
mm-hmm.
us to replicate a country club somewhere in Licking County where it might be kind of expensive to do that. So that's what they're trying to get that figured out right now. Okay. So Newark is, and there's parts, and it's all encompassed all around, the Great Circle and the Octagon there in Newark. Whereas Chillicothe, there's sites that are not as impeded by that, but mm-hmm. there's a Ohio State Penitentiary right next door to one of them.
Oh, yeah.
So when you have people coming from Belgium and say, "Oh, I'd like to go see your site," and then you drive by, well, that's where they got all the convicts, and and they put it right next to a World Heritage site. How could they do that?
Oh, it just feels American to me. But that's just me.
Well, I think there's a lot more appreciation of Native American culture
mm-hmm.
than we've ever had. And it's long overdue. And so all we can do is try to preserve what we can and do the best we can to be the best stewards of that. Mm-hmm. And that's part of what I try to do is, the role I'm involved in as an ambassador. Okay?
Fantastic. What is something you wish more people knew about Fort Ancient?
It's significant. It's historical significance, mm-hmm. how unique it is. and think about the human creativity, the genius it took to build that. And it's still there after 2,000 years or more. That's what's amazing. And so the design and the engineering that went into to build those things, and that they were carrying individual baskets of soil and sand and clay and rock, you know, and eventually over time, you know, that's the other thing, is trying to figure out how long did it take to build that. Or was every year they would come there and it would be a work session. You know, oh, well, we'll build this one, you know. So there's segments. It's not one continuous wall. There's like, I think 82 or 83 segments of walls, and then there's like a break through it so you can walk through it. And so then behind it is what they call the borrow pit. So they dug all this out and then moved it and built the wall. And so behind it are, you know, like little shallow ponds. And today they're preserved as what they call vernal pools. So they're a unique, you know, environmental situation in terms of the habitat for animals and life that lives in those ponds back behind the earthworks. And so it's kind of to me, that's what it's got all kinds of things to be able, it's a visual thing, but it's a historical thing, it's an archeological thing, but it's also a biologic feature. And it makes you think. It makes you, you know, not just Kings Island, but it's Fort Ancient. Okay.
Something wholly unique to Warren County. And it kind of puts the world more in a different perspective.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
We can. Would you like to talk about your project about Kings Mills, or call it a project?
So I mean, a lot of things I'm working on is that I do this volunteer work for Fort Ancient, and I'm doing my research on updating or documenting a history of Kings Mills as a quote-unquote company town from more of a human interest perspective, and I've been doing that for years. And what I've been able to do is then to use the resources from the Western Star to be able to pull out the historical notes of when did this explosion happen, or when did this train wreck happen, or when did so-and-so do this, and so the Western Star has been great as a resource to help me build that timeline and have primary sources of information to be able to put that picture together. So Schiffer in 2002 did a great book on the King and the Peters family and about Kings Mills. And then there was another guy named Harold Himes, who was a friend of my dad's, that did like his own self-published book of Kings Mills. And all I'm trying to do is just kind of build on their shoulders, but talk more from what was it like to live there. And what I also did was, because of Western Star, if there was an explosion that happened on this date in 1937, here are the people, here are their names, where were they, what were their age, and where were they from. And so when you do an index or a book, somebody could then see that, oh, there was a family member, and actually one of the former sheriffs for Warren County, I think his last name was Wallace, and his father or an uncle or something was injured in an industry accident in King Powder Company, and he talks about, you know, how that family were able to overcome, you know, the tragedy of that, and then he eventually became, you know, the sheriff of Warren County. You know, and so it's just, you know, things like that, or the other thing of one of the not character, but an individual, they called him Colonel King. And Colonel King was very influential in politics in Ohio, but there's a story that he was able to pull some strings when they were designing I-71 to make sure that there was a interchange at I-71 and Kings Mills Road. So that he knew, just like you think about it, when the trains would go through, how that impacted, you know, commerce and business. he knew that if you had an interchange there, that people could stop, and that would help with business and access. And it was closer to Kings Mills than it was to Mason. Well, it's not that today, because Mason obviously is incorporated most of that, but he was able to somehow, made things happen. So you can interpret that all kinds of however you want to in doing that. But that's the story about Kings Mills getting an interchange at Kings Mills Road on I-71.
Wild. Okay.
Yeah.
And I do admire that you're incorporating different people from just the more of the more human aspect instead of just the King's family. You're bringing in grassroots.
Because there were war heroes.
Yeah.
There were people that did great things in terms of the community, and just good people, and they had interesting stories to tell, or things that they helped each other out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I tried to emphasize, because some of them were my paper customers.
Yeah.
I knew them pretty well. So just kind of, and I think that's part of the sense of identity that somebody who grew up and lived there or lives there now feels special about the place. And what's unfortunate is that everybody is coming in to there right now. Deerfield Township takes care of it, but South Lebanon coming in, Mainville, Mason, and they're all positioning themselves, but nobody wants to come in and take a official ownership, to say, okay, well, we'll incorporate that. So that'll be interesting to see if that ever happens, either South Lebanon and then South Lebanon, they're spent a lot of time developing their history, and good for them in terms of what they've been able to do.
Yeah.
But those of us from Kings Mills will always say, well, King Powder Company and Peter's Cartridge was always Kings Mills. It wasn't South Lebanon. But now, in terms of how things have been incorporated, they're now have responsibility for that. So
interesting. And I hope they include the history of Kings Mills appropriately too.
Right.
We'll see, because it's just American progress.
Well, and that's part of my rationale for trying to do my documentation, as well. So hopefully it'll work out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well. Do you have a favorite part of Kings Mills history?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a favorite part of Kings Mills history in general, or a favorite individual that's come up in your research?
Was my next door neighbor, Timmy Dowdle. Timmy was a 6-year-old and lived in a public housing and experienced the 1890 explosion at Peter's Cartridge.
Oh.
And lived to tell it. And Timmy was a next door neighbor, and I can remember summer nights that we would sit on, he would sit on his front porch with Mrs. Dowell and my dad and a couple other people, and they would just sit there and tell stories about what it was like working at the factory, and all the characters that they knew, whether it was the town drunk or whatever that did such and such, or the ghost stories that people. That was another thing in terms of all the tragedies of the number of explosions and people who died in industry accidents in Kings Mills were unbelievable.
Wow.
And so the stories were people who would then go camping or do something that was like that the ghosts of people looking for their lost limbs, in the Little Miami River Valley, going up and down the river looking for that, because when those explosions happened, the Western Star was very graphic, describing how the body parts and how they were displayed or how they were found up in the trees, in the limbs of trees, and people would take a bucket around collecting them. And these are people that were your friends that you knew a couple hours before.
The older the paper, the more graphic the story.
Well, the story was, if something happened, the joke in Kings Mills was, well, there goes another one up in the trees.
Gee.
And there were these big sycamore trees that were down there, and they would find body parts of people. It was horrible. And So it was very much gallows humor to a certain extent. And like I said before about people who were used to explosions and mine issues in eastern Kentucky in the coal mines, hey, it's just the risk you take.
Just another drop in the bucket. Oh, that's
Hope they got hazard pay.
Well, but what's interesting is that there was such a strict rules and regulations about safety. You know, that because you didn't want to have any sparks because that would set off the gunpowder. So they would have copper nails in the horseshoes or the mules that they would, you know, carry the wagons that would transport the material around. Or they were very scared of, you know, obviously about smoking and clothing, and these rules were posted everywhere. And sometimes people were just careless, or sometimes the humidity would be so low and there'd be a lightning strike and it could just set things off, or a spark. It was horrible.
Brutal, yeah.
It was brutal.
I suppose there must have been plenty of regarding train derailments or train issues as well.
Absolutely. And that would happen. The other thing that happened was my dad would talk about just that Kings Mills, especially during World War II, there was such a heavy FBI presence.
Oh.
Because they were concerned about German saboteurs to vandalize or do something to the ammunition factory, because Peters Cartridge was contributing a significant amount of ammunition for the war effort, not just for the U.S., but for France, for the U.K., and even for Russia.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
and so during World War II, there was a hotel in Kings Mills called the Homestead Hotel, and it would house maybe 100, 150 people, and so international visitors would stay, and so there was international visitors, you know, businessmen or government officials or military people that would then go to the factory and then inspect for the quality control of the ammunition that was being delivered to their country from Peters.
Oh, wow. Looking at Peters Cartridge Factory today, isn't part of it apartments now?
Yeah.
Is that where that...
That's where all that was going on.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. So it's repurposing of a war machine to a residential, you know, upscale place to hang out.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about that?
And there's also a brewery there, too. What's interesting is that Gershom Peters was the most devout Baptist person you could ever imagine. Kings Mills has always been dry.
Well.
And so now that I'm sure he was turning over his grave if he knew that his factory, now part of it was turned into a beer brewery. And not only that, then after World War II, but before the loft and all this stuff happened, Seagram's stored all their whiskey in the warehouses. So you would drive down and go down the river and go across the bridge. It was the sweetest smelling whiskey you could ever imagine, and that was so. It was always kind of funny that they had the Women's Temperance League was so strong in Kings Mills. It was dry; you couldn't have any liquor sold there. Then you go to South Lebanon or Mason or Foster's, and it flowed. So everybody, you know, once they got paid, that's where they went for the weekend, and then they would come back and. You know, it's like, back in Kings Mills and go back to work.
Well, that's wild how that ended up. I didn't know about it being a dry part of the county either.
Oh, yeah. Very strong, dry part of the county.
Huh.
Yeah.
I never would have guessed.
So I'm sure you're probably going to edit a bunch of this stuff out. So it's what it is.
It's what it is. I think people will really enjoy some of the little stories about especially if people come in to listen to Kings Mills in particular. They would love to hear about this, I would imagine.
Well, and all I can say is, I hope I get my project and my book done, that it would, there's just all kinds of other stories like that too. And so, but it takes the time to document that, and then if you use pictures and then getting the permission for copyright, in terms of, and how much that takes a lot of time and effort.
It sure does.
To get that done too and do it right. So
I look forward to reading it. It'll be really interesting.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And let us know whenever that happens. We'll put out feelers, let people know, put out the good word. What significant events occurred over your lifetime that you would say had the greatest impact on you?
Couple of things. One, it was just, that the values that my mom and dad, gave me growing up, and being a part of a church and understanding that relationship and who I am and my relationship with God was important. Then, from a career standpoint, finally discovering that, hey, I can be a geologist and make money at it, versus I thought I was just going to be a teacher and go back and coach at King's High School. Honestly. And I had a professor that encouraged me to do that, so I took a risk and did it. And then find my wife, was a great person that, the two of us were able to, we walked away. My mom always thought, when are you coming back? When are you coming back? And it's like, well, you don't really find a whole lot of oil and gas in this part of the country. We're going to be down there. And so that and the international exposure, how it changed me and gave me a worldview of, but then when I'd see a worldview, but I was always glad to come back to where my roots are. And I always felt comfortable coming back, because when I did, I felt welcome coming back. So, and then because of that, then to be able to give back. So this whole thing is kind of full circle.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
So.
What, anything else would you like to add about any information about Fort Ancient that we didn't touch on? Or just the ceremony or Earthworks at large?
I would, specifically for Warren County, it's just hopefully we can raising the awareness and understanding what it's all about. And there's been generations of people who have been involved in helping build and make Fort Ancient what it is. There's a former manager that was there for many, many years. His name was Jack Blosser. And Jack has recently moved on, and he's doing some other work. But Jack was one, and others that have come and gone and recognize the significance of it and want to preserve it. And what's the best way to go about doing that? And so that's the opportunity for the people of Ohio and Warren County, is what can we do to want to appreciate it, and then how do you preserve it so that the next generation can also benefit, from seeing, things like that too. So that would be my hope, is that happens. And somehow, some way, they build a tramway or something to go from the bike path that you can go. Actually, some people think that there's an archaeologist that believes that at one of the lookout points on Fort Ancient, looking south towards the Little Miami River, that there were two big pillars or earthworks that were built up, and it was like a major entry gateway. And they also think that the limestone around here is kind of like, it's kind of maybe that thick, and it's light gray, and you get slabs of it. That they think they slabbed the whole thing like a walkway from the gateway down to the river. And so when people would come up to visit, then they would, that's what they would park or stop their canoe and then walk up. And they think about it, if it's just this light gray and it's all covered in stone and the light's shining on it, it's very bright and very dramatic to see, oh, this is it. And so we're still trying to figure out, if that's true, and if it's true, do you really want to recreate that? It would be fantastic.
Right.
But there's some people that are purists to say, you don't do that and whatever, but that's what I always thought, boy, that'd be fantastic to do something like that. It would be a great visual.
It definitely would, and I mean the funding could give something. Maybe not akin to that, but
yeah, absolutely.
Man, what would you say is the greatest challenge in your life?
Being away from family. So I wasn't there when my dad died. He died, and at home, and my mom too. So it's just. And then my kids not being able to have that much time to spend with grandparents, both on Becky's side and my side too. So it's a sacrifice you make by being away from family. And so we would maybe make twice a year, whether it's Christmas or summertime, to come back. And so that would be, it was a family thing for us that we didn't get to experience, and we're jealous of other family members, and they were jealous of us because we weren't close. Or they, do you realize what it's like to be around with them? At least you're away from it. You don't have to deal with it. Like, I guess there's always trade-offs. So
there's always trade-offs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that is difficult to be away, but hey, like you said.
Right.
What are some of your fondest memories?
One, being a paper boy. Every day, meeting, being with people. The other thing would be, just going to school there. Because at school, when I started high school, the high school was pretty brand new. It was like maybe 2 or 3 years old, so it was new. It wasn't that old gymnasium that was the barn. It was this nice new thing, and just growing up. And I had a earth science teacher or a science teacher in high school that kind of inspired me to go into science. And he would help me and give me suggestions on where to go find fossils and collect and do stuff. And he even, after I graduated, he got married, and they had a family, and he named his first son after me.
Oh goodness!
Yeah,
I wouldn't have expected that.
He was, and so when I came back, I received a distinguished alumnus award from King's, and I was able to make a donation to the school for their science department, and did it in honor of Vernon Carr, who was the teacher at King's High School that inspired me to go to college and be a scientist. So
that's very nice.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. Cool guy. That's the thing. I think there's people along the way that inspire you.
Yeah.
And so if I can feel like I've inspired somebody, that would make me feel like I did something. It's more than just giving money or whatever. It's do you really cause somebody to see something good in you, and they appreciate what you've done. So, yeah.
That's a fantastic thing to provide to the younger generation here. Do you have any specific stories that your family has passed down through the years?
I think I've told you a bunch already.
Yeah. What about ancestral, older family like that's coming?
Well, there's one story that I would like to share is that on the Stephenson farm, that's on Fort Ancient Road, or I think it's 350, and that hits 123, nearby 71. There was an 80-acre farm, and that was John Stephenson. And in the late 1870s, there was a professor, there's a geologist, name was Edward Orton, and he was doing the geologic survey reports on all the various counties of Warren County. And he was working on Ohio, but he was working on Warren County. And in his report that was published, I think in 1878, he cited John Stephenson, farmer from Lebanon, to pointing out to him the location of one of the largest glacial boulders in the state of Ohio, which is at the Rock Schoolhouse, just outside of Lebanon, at 123 and 71. It's behind the school. And so it's like, even back then, my ancestors were interested in geology, and then Mr. Orton ended up becoming the president of the Ohio University.
Very fun.
Okay, so it's written down that Orton, who recognized, they thanked my ancestor for pointing that out to him. Otherwise, he would have missed it. He wouldn't have seen it. So I've got that blown up and enlarged. I'm proud of that. So it's a good thing.
Good. Keep it framed.
Absolutely.
What would you say you're most proud of? You have all these projects. I mean, what would you say?
That's a good question. I think I'm proud of the work that my wife and I have done to kind of help with Warren County history, whether it's family or whatever. I think it's proud of my 2 kids that are doing great in their careers. Just the whole idea of feeling like you're giving back. That's kind of what I'm proud of. Is it's not all just to me. It's you're giving somebody else and they can benefit. So
That's wonderful.
okay.
Who is the greatest influence you've had as a child or as an adult?
Well, I would say I gave a talk there was a group of science teachers in Houston that visited when I was at BP, and I don't have the list with me now, but I listed the name of every teacher I had starting from, this is pre-kindergarten, but it was first grade through college, and every one of those teachers had an impact on me. And I wanted those teachers to know that I remembered those teachers' names, and without them I wouldn't be here standing in front of them trying to talk about geology or earth science or whatever. And I said, so no matter what you do is important, in teaching the next generation.
Yeah.
And people do appreciate that. So I start crying, the teachers are crying, and it was kind of funny, but it was very emotional about people that spent the time and saw something in you, encouraged you, and challenged you, to do that. And so, and then my parents too, they were always challenging me, and so I'm happy for that. Okay.
That's nice. That's wonderful. And I don't know what else to say after some of these, because I'm like, oh, that's really touching.
That's okay. You can cut it now. Let's go out on a high, all right?
I just got 2 more left here. What advice would you like to give to anybody listening?
I think follow your passion. And realize that one of the things you realize is you're a lot more valuable than what you realize yourself, whether it's your background, your experiences, and things that that you do. I mean, I've told that to several people that looking at making a career change and say, oh, I don't know if I can do that. Well, you don't realize how valuable what you bring to the table, and to encourage people to take that risk. Because I took a risk to leave the hamlet of Kings Mills and go out to the big world. And but the opportunity was there. I mean, God opened doors for us, and made things happen. And it was great that I did it. But some people are afraid to do that.
Yeah.
And that's okay if that's what But whatever situation you're in, then make the best of it, and think about ways that not only for yourself, but how do you, help your family or your community and get involved in doing stuff. Okay.
Yeah, that's some really good advice. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we didn't already cover? We've talked about so much already, but
no, I think that's one. What I'd add is thank you for allowing me to do this.
Of course.
Well, but I mean, you don't have to, and so thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that, and giving the freedom to converse with you and give some of my stories, and I appreciate it. And so for me, as somebody from Kings Mills, I've been gone for a long time. So some people might say, well, you're not one of us anymore. So I want to make sure that what I'm say or talk about it's in the spirit of representing that community and who they are, and not to say it's all about me.
Right.
Okay. And so I feel honored to be able to tell that story, and that there's a lot of interesting things that that people, I never realized that, or I didn't know that. And so I find that out all the time in terms of sharing stuff with people that had no idea. It's like, well, you got to get it out there. So I would say thank you for the Record Center and for everything that you guys do, and I'm just proud of that one of ours from Kings Mills, Edna Bowyer, was was a big part of the Record Center here in Warren County. Glad to see you continuing on that work that she did. So hats off to you guys for doing that.
Of course, and thank you for coming here. And we have we have Edna Boyer's plaque right there. You probably saw when you came in.
Oh yeah.
It's she meant a lot to all of us here. She even donated her copy of Beer's History in the back there.
Oh really?
So we still have some of her own material.
Wow. That's cool.
Oh yeah. Do you have anything you want to add, Amber?
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for coming, and this will conclude the oral history event.